Tell me to stop recording. Okay, we'll give them one more minute and then we'll get started. Welcome all. We're delighted that you came out on a Saturday morning to hear our great speakers discuss redistricting, which is a topic of great importance that impacts virtually everyone. I am Barb Light, a volunteer with the League of Women Voters of Florida, and your other co-host is Susie Kaplow, recently retired from the Supervisor of Elections office in Leon County, and currently a volunteer with the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. I could go on for literally hours about how wonderful each speaker is and provide an extremely long list of what each has done to help protect our democracy. I also have to say, in all honesty, that these are two of the nicest people that I have ever worked with. But rather than ramble on, I'm going to yield our precious time to the speakers themselves. Mark Early, many of you know, is the Supervisor of Elections for Leon County and also the President-elect of the Florida Supervisors of Elections. Cecile Scoon is a prominent civil rights attorney and also our new president of the League of Women Voters of Florida. Mark will talk first, and we are going to leave all questions until both speakers have talked. And that's in part because questions that may arise during Mark's talk by Cecile, and also to ensure that both speakers have an equal amount of time. So at the moment, the chat box is disabled, so you won't be able to write any questions, but I will open that up and there'll be plenty of time for questions after the conclusion of both talks. So without further ado, Supervisor Early, I yield the floor to you.
All right, thanks, Barb. I'm going to share my screen, but it's a pleasure to be here. And we'll see how many questions we get. But I just want to go through the basics of redistricting. We may talk a little bit. I might mention a little bit, and certainly when Ms. Scoon jumps on, there might be some discussion about where we stand currently. But then we'll hit some of that also. But I'm going to share my screen. So redistricting 101. I've been in elections since '86. I think this is my fourth redistricting, 90, 2000, 2010, actually counting the 2015 redrawing of some of the maps. And so this might actually be my fifth one. Redistricting is always fun. It's very difficult to conduct elections around redistricting because there's always lawsuits and delays, and we're trying to get an election moving forward for this fall, while there's a lot of uncertainty about the precinct lines and the district lines that all the different representatives are actually going to be representing. So what are the basics of, or some of the confusion around redistricting? Let's see if this, it's certainly in the headlines. There was big articles even yesterday and today. I think it was a really good article in the Washington Post today that is focused on some of the congressional lines, but Florida, with us being a key state as far as presidential elections go, a swing state certainly, everybody's focused on Florida maps, congressional maps, and our state and house maps, and even our local maps. So what is reapportionment? Every 10 years, the United States Census counts each person in the country. That was a very contentious process this past year. And frankly, the last couple of years, it seems it's getting more and more contentious about how you even count folks. But the point of that is to make sure that our country is divided into various different political districts so that you get equal representation in Congress and, you know, essentially in your, presumably in your state houses also. So the Census Bureau uses this to decide how many seats in that U.S. House of Representatives each state will get based upon this growth or decrease in their population. And Florida was, I guess you could say, one of the big winners. We've had a large population increase over the last 10 years. So we gained a seat, went up from 27 to 28 seats. This is an overall look at what happened nationwide. You can see Texas gained 2 seats, and some of the Northeast folks in purple, they lost 1 seat. The light green are the various states that gained a seat. And California also lost a seat, which I think was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. So we were talking about reapportionment. That's taking the numbers from the census and deciding how many House seats are in each state. Redistricting is drawing the lines to divvy up the state amongst the various congressional seats. And that becomes the goal is to balance the population after the reapportionment in each district. At the congressional level, it's very exacting that you're trying to make very, very close equal numbers in each district. It's a little less precise, the need to be precise at the House, at the state level and the local level for the House and Senate and County Commission and school board lines. But the goal of all of that really is to have very close numbers so you get equal representation. So why are the districts changing? Like I say, the legislatures must or get to, it depends on how you look at it, draw new district lines so that we can incorporate those numbers. As it says, elected officials needs to make sure that the population is evenly distributed. That's where things can get very dicey. Like I say, the district lines for federal, state, and local offices are redrawn so that roughly they're the same population-wise. So here's the list of different types of districts that can change or that will be changing potentially. 28 U.S. representatives in Florida, 40 state senators, 120 state representatives. All of these lines are changing. The Leon County Commission seats, we have 5 single-member districts. Those were subject to change. We'll talk about the very minor changes actually that evolved from that. And then also the school boards were potentially going to change. The Leon County School Board decided not to change their lines because they decided their population growth hadn't made any specific single-member district unbalanced. And then some people might think the city of Tallahassee has 5 seats, but they're all at large. So none of those are single members, so none of those would actually change. The current congressional map. This was really implemented in, I guess this was in what happened in 2015. If you look right here, I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, but where Tallahassee is, District 2 kind of creeps up, District 5 comes over from Jacksonville and goes over towards Gadsden County. But right in city limits of Tallahassee, there's almost a little swirl like a hurricane symbol. And we were calling that process the perfect storm for us because it really split some of our neighborhoods. And it was very difficult to draw our precinct lines after this redistricting, excuse me. Current Senate map, it's much simpler. It's fairly straightforward. This is the current map, the current House map. It's more complicated because there's so many more districts, I believe 120. And you can see that Leon County is split into 3. District 7, which is a very small portion down to the south side of the county, District 8, which is more of the western side, and District 9 of the eastern side. So that's kind of where we are and while we're doing it. So who is responsible for doing each step of the way? So the U.S. House of Representatives district maps are drawn by the Florida legislature. The Florida House and Senate district maps are also drawn by the legislature. The Leon County Board of Commissioners can draw their own lines, and same with the school board. My role is not necessarily for reapportionment or redistricting, but once the redistricting happens, I need to overlay all of those different lines, and that gives us little teeny chunks of our county that has various sets of political districts overlapping each other, and that's how we create precincts. Some years our lines don't change much, and so our precincts can stay very static or close to it. And some years our lines change dramatically, and we have to draw a whole bunch of new lines. Our goal, though, is to make sure that everybody, for the most part, still votes in their same location so that there's not a lot of disruption for our voters. And that precinct process or re-precincting, that's one of the last things that happens before we can actually program our voting machines to make sure that everybody is voting on the right ballot styles. We have to do that before we send out the new ID cards to announce to voters where they're going to be voting, and to draw our lines within our software that creates the ballots so that we actually do have the right sets of contests on everybody's ballot. We don't want to send a ballot to someone that has the wrong contest, the wrong political offices up for election. That's a very, very arduous process from our perspective. And so if we don't get these redistricting lines early in the game, it makes it very difficult for us to get our ballots ready to send out to voters. And we have to do that 45 days before the election. And that's not long after qualifying. I talked a little bit about polling place changes. Each precinct has an election day polling place. Some will change, but we're really trying to minimize the number of changes. But I intend to send out new voter information cards to every voter after this process, so everyone knows exactly where they'll be voting. And that's one of the last things we do before we actually start sending out ballots. So another process, and I may have alluded to it earlier, that gets kind of ugly during the reapportionment, redistricting, and re-precincting process, but it's primarily in the redistricting process, are the courts. Maps can be challenged. They often are. There's some just judicial review processes that are part of statute where the courts look at the maps and just kind of give their stamp of approval. So the federal courts, maps can be challenged if they are drawn to discriminate based on race. Okay. Issues regarding partisan gerrymandering claims, however, are really not subject to federal court review. That's because of the case listed here. You would think potentially that if it looks like a map is drawn to favor one party or another, that the courts could overturn those. But that's, gerrymandering has been determined by the courts, it appears, for the most part, to be a political process, and the courts are reticent about changing based on political decisions. However, the key way to challenge maps are based on racial discrimination, packing or splitting out the ability for various racial groups to actually get anybody elected to represent them. And that's a lot of what happened with the Congressional District 5 in mid-decade. The state courts, maps can be challenged if they intentionally favor or disfavor a political party or incumbent. That's at the state court level. So the last set of Florida Senate and House maps were challenged and redrawn due to partisan gerrymandering. Again, one's a federal challenge, a constitutional challenge, and one is a state challenge. There was a law not long ago passed that essentially said at the state level, districts can't be drawn to favor one party or another. And some of that happened. And I think it was proven in court in the middle of the decade. That was that extra redrawing we've done. I hadn't seen anything like that happen before. So there are laws in place to prevent that at the state level. Shenanigans happen nonetheless. So the key laws governing this, again, of course, at the federal level, it's the U.S. Constitution and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There were a lot of protections built into the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Unfortunately, from my perspective, some fairly recent court changes, as I'm sure most folks here are aware, have undermined the ability of the federal Department of Justice or the federal courts to change or have oversight or challenge some of the things the states do. And that is a growing trend. There's still challenges to different parts of the Voting Rights Act of 65 that are undermining the authority of the federal government to really have constitutional oversight on some of this. Frankly, I think that's a very unfortunate thing. State laws, the Florida Constitution requires Florida legislature to divide the state into 30 to 40 contiguous Senate districts and 80 to 120 House districts. We're, I think, at the max 40 and 120. Here's Article 3, Sections 20 and 21. This is the relatively new. Prohibits line drawing that intentionally favors or disfavors a political party or an incumbent. And then we can read through these. Article 8, Section 1E sets the size of county commissions of 5 or 7 and must be of contiguous and nearly equal population. And then Article 9, Section 4A for the school boards. And then Florida statutes, 11.031. The Florida legislature must exclusively use data from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's seen as the authoritative source. And so that is actually what causes the census data to be subject to, or the census taking to be so critical. The rules around census taking really decide who gets counted and who doesn't. And there were a lot of challenges during the past census about who gets counted, what kind of questions you can ask to get an accurate count. There's always concerns around that every census because it impacts the apportionment so much, but it just seems to be getting worse. And then you can see 124.01 and 1001.36. Those are the Florida statutes for county commission and school board. Guiding principles of this, as far as redistricting, how you're carving up whatever geography you're looking at to achieve the reapportionment and get to the redistricting. Compactness and contiguity. Do you have these tendrils going out that seem to be attempts to either dilute the ability to vote or pack the ability to elect a person into one district? Political subdivisions, and for the most part, you're trying to incorporate them and not split them. At least that's the concept. Communities of interest, the same thing. You don't want to necessarily split somebody's community so that their voice gets split apart into various districts, and potentially they don't have much say in either one of those. Whereas if they were kept together, then their ability to speak to their representatives and have their voice heard and represented in whatever changes to statute or rule or what have you are being considered by that political group. If you dilute that, you lose your say. And then, of course, you're not supposed to either favor or disfavor an existing incumbent, essentially drawing a line so that they can't serve anymore. The concept is to respect those incumbencies, but that changes sometimes too, and I think that's been in the news lately. Leon County, the county commission redistricting status. The county has only proposed 2 small changes to districts 1 and 2. Roughly, it moves about 500 residents from District 1 to District 2 because of some small population changes. The map was approved December 14th, and it must also be approved by the NAACP and the district courts, and I think it's still in that process. I don't believe anybody's anticipating any major challenges to that. So here is our Leon County Commission lines, and we focused in the call out there. Those few blocks there are the ones that have changed and gone, I believe it was from District 1 to District 2. Yeah. So that hash mark is now in District 2, and that's over pretty close to FSU. Leon County Schools, like I said, no changes. And here are the school board maps. But I think, well, they've been static for the past 10 years, and they'll be static for the next 10 years. Where's all the fun happening? And I say that maybe sarcastically. The Florida legislative map status. I will say that the legislative maps were fairly smooth as far as the process. There wasn't a whole lot of controversy. The legislature has approved the maps for the House and the Senate. Okay, without some people would say there wasn't a whole lot of oversight from the public, and I think that probably was true. But having said that, what I'm hearing is both sides don't think that the Florida House and Senate maps, for the most part, were gerrymandered problematically or really altered that much from the previous maps to have much you can complain about, I guess is how I would say it. Now, if there's anyone that disagrees with that here, absolutely chime in. I don't have a whole lot to do with the redistricting, except I have to deal with it to make new precincts. So I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that. The Florida legislature does need to pass joint resolutions to adopt these maps. And of course, the Attorney General has to, they actually receive the maps, petition the Supreme Court to review them. Once the Supreme Court does that, then the Florida legislature passes the resolutions. And the governor cannot veto the Florida legislative maps. We're not talking about the congressional maps. We're talking about the legislative maps. So right now, the big deal in the news, of course, are the congressional maps, because the House and Senate had two versions, which are relatively close to each other, especially with regards to Congressional District 5. And concurrently, because they intertwine a little bit, Congressional District 2. And essentially, they preserved the status quo. But then, of course, the governor has asked the Supreme Court for their opinion. Recently, the Supreme Court decided not to give an opinion. So I think that all of that has made a lot of news right now. So we'll talk about that in a second a little bit more. So here are the new Florida Senate maps. Again, not a whole lot of change in our area. You can see the colored sections of this overlay are the new maps. The kind of paler blue outline are the existing maps. So a little bit of changes in our area. There are some more changes down and through here, but it's not been especially controversial so far. The new House maps, there have been some relatively significant changes here being proposed. Again, these are not finalized and have been approved by the joint resolution, but I think they're still up for review. This one bears a little bit closer attention. You can see that House District 9 has changed a lot. The green outline there, right kind of over top of Tallahassee, was the previous House District 9. Now it's been extended out to the east and does not incorporate as much of downtown Tallahassee as it used to. So there's some concern there about, and I think that's Allison Tant's, Representative Tant's district. There's some concern about what that's doing to her constituency. So that, I'll let others comment on that. The Florida congressional maps, that's where the big news is right now. The Senate approved a congressional map. The House, I believe, was about to approve a congressional map, but they stopped when the governor decided he would draw his own map. He indicated he might veto the map because he was stating that it might be, well, I'll let him decide what he wants to call that. He did submit his own proposed map, and he requested an advisory opinion for the Supreme Court on the layout of District 5 that the House and Senate had proposed. And very recently, I guess last couple of days, the Supreme Court declined to issue an opinion on those maps. So the House had stopped work until the Supreme Court decides. So it'll be interesting to see next week what happens with the House, or in the House, with regard to congressional maps. Here's the current congressional map approved by the Senate. So you can see Congressional District 5, Congressional 2 did not change a whole lot. Here's the one submitted by the governor. If you go back and forth, you can see that 5 extends all across the north border of Florida, from Jacksonville all the way west into Gadsden County. And then 2 cuts down along the Big Bend area, and 3's over around, I guess that's roughly around Ocala. The new map 2 goes well over towards, I don't know if that gets clear to the Suwannee River, but close to it. District 11 is over here, and you can see nothing from Jacksonville extends over towards Tallahassee. So that's a massive rewrite of the map that was really put in place by the courts based on the challenges. So it's kind of a bold move. It's pretty unprecedented that the governor would submit something like that. But as I said, the courts decided not to give an opinion on this. So we'll see how the House responds. So the process is still ongoing. By the time you read this, the situation may have changed. That's certainly true, because this is there's a lot at stake here, especially at the congressional level. This decides presidential votes. There's a lot at stake here. More at the local level, the court is still reviewing the Leon County redistricting. We don't anticipate any real problems, any real challenges to the county commission lines. The Florida House and Senate maps, the legislature does still need to pass that joint resolution, I'm pretty sure. Again, like we were saying earlier, the congressional map, it's very uncertain at this point, because I think the governor has made known what he wants the legislature to do. The Senate's approved their map. The House has been waiting. They haven't had much context from the courts to make a decision. So we'll see what happens there. Of course, the House and the Senate maps have to match at some point. And if the House goes with the governor's maps, then there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and this could really get prolonged and ugly. And we'll see how it goes. Certainly, there's possible litigation. It's likely litigation. And from my perspective and for our voters, I hope this gets resolved relatively quickly so we can move forward with getting our information out to our voters about their new districts and their new precincts, and we can get the ballots out to folks in a fairly timely manner. But it's always a challenge every 10 years. What can you do? Stay informed. That's why you're here. Hopefully my comments have been more informative than confusing. Draw and submit your maps. It's kind of late for that, but if court challenges start blossoming, which likely they will, there might be an opportunity. The courts may reach out and get some input. We'll see. Contact your legislators. Certainly give that a whirl. Good luck. So the kind of a summary here, the year of apportionment election law changes. All state Senate seats up for election. The petition deadline and candidate qualifying for U.S. representatives shift to the second qualifying period. Changes to the petition process. This happens every census. Multi-county district candidates, really in non-census years, non-reapportionment years, you have to get your petitions to file and qualify to be a candidate, from your political district. But since the lines are all changing, that gets opened up to you can get those petitions signed from really anywhere in the state, because in theory, your district lines could change to anywhere. Same thing with county commission district candidates, single member candidates. They can get petitions signed from anywhere in the county instead of just their single member district boundaries, because those are in flux too. And the petitions do not need to include the district number, because in theory, the district numbers could change. You can see that in some of the different maps that I looked at earlier for those geographic areas. And the number of required petitions does not vary based on district. In non-reapportionment years and non-redistricting years, there's some variations, small variations based upon the population sizes of those single member districts. Here, it's just straightforward, and it's all listed for our county commission and school board candidates. It's listed on our websites. Getting near the end of this presentation. So here's our timeline. We're right there in the area highlighted in yellow. The Florida legislature meets. We are in session, of course, and new district maps are approved at some point. based upon court challenges, et cetera. And then this spring, we SOE, Supervisors of Elections, will be drawing new precinct maps. That's happening across the state, although we're kind of waiting. We have started looking at some of the potential changes, but until things are done in the courts, it's hard for us to get our information out to the new voters. We have to send the new information cards. And then the candidates qualifying for office based on these new maps, that's all in flux too. Mostly the county commission and of course the school board lines are known. It's more the state house, state senate, and congressional maps that are in flux here, at least in Leon County. And once we get qualifying, that's when we start doing the ballot preparation. The election date in this timeline is 8/23, August 23rd. However, we have to mail out our overseas ballots 45 days out from that, which puts that really in the beginning of July. So like the first week in July. And if I remember correctly, qualifying ends, I think it's the 15th or the 17th of June. So we have about 3 weeks from qualifying ending to start getting our ballots designed and out to the voters, at least the overseas. And so that's a very tight timeline. It gets disrupted very easily by extended court cases. Typically, the courts understand the pressures we're under. We actually make that known. We have a small role, just an informative role for the courts in that process for any challenges to the district lines. But just because we face statutory deadlines doesn't mean that the courts always act quickly enough to make our job of getting those ballots out to the voters a smooth process. So that's the completion of my slideshow. I think Ms. Scoon will be speaking next. Here's my contact info if anybody needs it. We're very easy to find, leonvotes.gov. All of this is on the web, but you can follow us at Leon Votes. And our number is 606, and that 8683, that's vote. So 850-606-VOTE. And it's easy to contact my office or talk to me. So feel free if you have any other questions, and I'll be happy to take questions once we move forward. So I'm going to unshare my screen. If I can get to that. There it is. Stop share.
Thank you, Mark. That was excellent.
I hope so. It's hard to do that without a whole lot of feedback.
Yes. And that was excellent. And Cecile, I yield the floor to you.
Okay. Mark, I was taking notes. That was really good. Again, my name is Cecile Scoon. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Florida. I'm a practicing attorney, so I've been monitoring what's been going on very, very carefully on so many levels. One, just the process itself is so statutory bound. You want to follow it, and then all the issues that could be addressed possibly in court. So we're watching it very, very carefully. And as Barbara said earlier, we are nonpartisan. We don't get involved in which party or which candidate. We are about educating people about all aspects of voting, and redistricting and reapportionment is part of that, and just making sure that our laws are complied with. That's our goal. So can you go ahead and share screen for my PowerPoint, Barbara? We've prepared a little PowerPoint, and the first image is from an African-American artist in our town, Ricky Steele, and he'd been highlighted for Black History Month many times, but he painted a painting after a postage stamp, and I think it's quite compelling. This postage stamp came out, I guess, in 1985 or in that time frame.
Can you see these?
I cannot.
Oh, wait a minute. Can you see it now?
No. Mark, can you?
No,
Can
nothing
you see?
yet.
Okay. I can also try, Barb, if you're having difficulty.
Um, okay,
There you go.
I'm starting to see it now, I think.
okay, can you see it now?
Yes, there it is. Thank
Excellent.
you. That's the first screen. Can you, there you go.
There you
Perfect.
go.
There, very good. So I was telling you about this artist. His name is Ricky Steele. He's, if you want to learn more about him, but I just love that the youth were inspired in, this was after a photograph that he, and was made into a postage stamp. And then this is a fairly large painting hanging in my office. But this is called Redistricting: The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Next slide. I'm going to cover some of the things that were already stated, but just as part of my presentation, I like to make sure everybody has a full understanding. Basically, this process is very important because it happens every 10 years and it controls many aspects of our access to our representatives and who is our representative, which controls our access to resources and many other things for 10 years. Next slide. Some of the things I'd like you to remember is some terms. One is called cracking, and that is, hold on for a second. I'm in a fairly small place. Are you hearing background noise? I can ask them to be a little more quiet. Or is this fine, Barbara?
That I think you're good.
It
Okay.
wasn't very disruptive. Yeah. Couldn't hear it
All
hardly.
right, let me know because, and I'll just ask family to be a little more quiet. So the terms to remember is cracking. Basically, that's when you have a group of people that if you were to draw lines in a certain way, they would be able to have a voice. But what they want to do is they want to minimize their impact. So they split them so that they're too small to have sufficient power to select a representative of their choice. And that's called cracking. There's another trick that people use when they draw redistricting lines, and that is something that takes a little more sophistication to understand. Let's say that you needed about 51% of a particular group, or racial minority or language minority, to have the opportunity, a real opportunity to select a representative of your choice, right? And what if they said, we're going to draw the line so there's 80% in that particular district? And some people might initially say, hey, that's great. You know, we're guaranteed. But in fact, what happens is it's called wasted votes because you only needed about the 51%. And when you pack in all those others on top, in a sense, guaranteeing that you would have a minority access district, people say that you should have put those extra 30% next door to influence the decisions of that next representative. In other words, when you pack, you dilute in terms of how many districts are going to be listening to different voices. So these are things we need to be aware of. Next slide. This is one of my favorite slides, and I'm just going to take a moment and go over it. I've used it many, many times, and people often say, oh, I understand now. So basically, we're going to use an example. Let's say in our example here, on the far left, we have 2 rows of green and 3 rows of yellow. So basically, if those with green interests, everything was fair, you would expect there would be 2 representatives who have green interests and 3 representatives who have yellow interest if the lines were drawn fairly. So let's go up to the top next door where you see the horizontal lines all the way across. And watch what happens. If you look at each of the boxes in between the black lines, in every box, which there are 5, the green interest is always a minority. So even though you would have expected them to have 2 representatives, they're not going to have any because the lines were drawn so that every single time the green voice is limited. That's an example of cracking because you're splitting up the green voice in such a way that they're never going to have enough to select a representative of their choice. Now come all the way down and you see the lines are now vertical, up and down. And there's some good things there because when you look at the district lines, it looks like you're going to have 2 representatives with green interest and 3 representatives with yellow interest. And that's the correct proportion. But the problem here that we have to think about is this kind of drawing of everybody being the same in one particular district. That means that representatives are less likely to listen to each other and care about disparate voices. So they can just play to their base and never listen to the yellow. And green never has to listen to, um, the yellow never has to listen to green. So you get some proportionality here, but you may not get as much communication and thinking. Now let's go all the way to the top where you have the puzzle pieces up to the top to the right. And here's something really interesting going on here. The way the lines have been drawn, again, if you follow the black lines, those are the districts. In 3 of the districts, green predominates. So even though green was only supposed to have in proportionally 2 representatives, well, they're going to get an extra boost because the lines were drawn in a way to over empower the green. So they're going to get 3, and the more populous yellow is only going to get 2 because the way the district lines are drawn. And these physical looking at these designs really helps people get a mental and picture of what we're talking about when we say that maps are drawn unfairly. Let's go to the last one. It's kind of like 3 bears. This is the one that's possibly just right. And if you go down, this is the one with the steps. And if you look at it, I like this one because every district has a combination of yellow and green. So that representative there can't just go, la, 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 I can't hear you, because part of his or her base is from just disparate communities. And so they're more likely to cooperate, negotiate, and hopefully legislation will pass thinking of everybody's rights. And it turns out that green predominates in 2 of the districts and yellow predominates in 3. So we have the correct proportion. So that's what the goal is that we say would be fair, what we would like to see in the league and many other voting rights activists and experts would like to see. Next slide. I wanted to share with you just a little bit of history of where we are. And this was discussed just a few minutes ago with Mr. Early, but we'll go a little more detail. In 2010, the league and a coalition called Fair Districts Coalition worked really, really hard to get 2 constitutional amendments passed. And we refer to them as the Fair Districts. And Mr. Early had them up on the screen. But we refer to them as Fair Districts. And what we're going to go into what they are in just a moment. But the concept of fair districts is that basically 2 components. One is that in our Constitution, the citizens have stated through citizen initiative, which was passed, they said, we don't want one party drawing lines to benefit itself or any other party. It must be fair. There must be no partisan bias. So that's one part. The other part says that minorities, either racial or language minorities, if there's an opportunity for them, our district to be drawn so that they have an opportunity to select a representative of their choice, this must be done. And the other aspect is there can be no retrogression. You can't go backwards. Once it's been established that there's a minority district, you can't take the number down. So those are the main things that Fair Districts does. Now, as Mr. Early stated, the Republican Party nodded their head back in 2010 and said, oh, we see, we're going to follow it. But in fact, they didn't. And there was a litigation and lawsuits and emails were discovered, and they actually signed a document, which is in the court files for all of us to read, where they literally admitted to intentionally violating Fair Districts laws. And so in that litigation, which was very time consuming, and it was brought primarily with the League of Women Voters, then the Fair Districts Coalition and Common Cause of Florida, we won. As a consequence of the win, basically the Florida Supreme Court said, okay, legislators, we caught you, you admitted you did wrong, fix the maps. Well, they had disagreements and they couldn't fix the maps. And one of the maps that was Early submitted by the league was the one that was adopted. And that's the one that has the congressional line going from Jacksonville all the way past Tallahassee. That District 5, that was one of the ones that was created. Next slide. So basically, here's written out for you the components of fair districts. Now, so we said no drawing lines that favor one party or the other, no drawing lines that harm a racial or language minority's opportunity to select representatives of their choice. It is required that all of our districts be connected, contiguous. So you couldn't have a little ball up in North Florida and a bigger ball down in Key West. They've got to touch. So they must be contiguous. And those first two things that I talked about, racial and language minorities protection and no political bias, those are called Tier 1. Those are the top things that must be done. The next set of requirements or guidelines, I would say, they're not requirements, but guidelines, they defer to Tier 1. They're called Tier 2. And so the district should be as compact as possible. They need to, if you can, pay attention to geographical elements such as bays and rivers. We want them to be equal in population as much as possible and be aware of limiting crossing jurisdictional lines of cities and county lines. Now, again, these are things we would like to have, but if any of those Tier 2 elements conflict with Tier 1, then you give up on Tier 2. That's important to remember. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Now, what's been going on, fast forwarding what's been going on now with our state and our House of Representatives, each one has drawn maps. And one of the things that they have done is they said, and it's in writing, they've testified to it, it's been stated many times, and the league has had meetings with Senator Rodriguez, and he confirmed this. Basically, they built all their maps on Tier 2. Those are the things that need to defer to Tier 1. And so the things that were not mandatory. So we asked the question, so how are you checking to make sure that the mandatory protections for race and language minorities and nonpartisanship of the lines, how are you checking for that? And their answer is, oh, we're checking with all of the minority districts that were established by the Florida Supreme Court in 2015, right? So our answer to them is that is a start, but you need to look in other areas where there's been population growth of minorities, because otherwise you could miss additional districts. And that has been the league's concern that we've raised over and over again at many of the hearings, and it's been somewhat in the media. Two things that we're saying. First of all, they built their maps on the non-mandatory, less important things. And then when they checked to make sure that Tier 1 was being protected, which was protecting racial minorities and language minorities and preventing preventing partisan gerrymandering, they only checked the few districts that were established by the Florida Supreme Court back in 2015. Now, when the Florida Supreme Court made that decision in 2015, they were looking at 2010 census data. So we are concerned that the 2020 census data has not been properly reviewed in the sense of where are you looking for population growth. We know that there's been 1.5 million more Hispanics. That's the estimate in the state. And we know that the African American population has grown by almost 500,000. So our concerns are twofold with regards to the way the maps were built. So we believe that there are additional districts that should be developed by the state legislators on the state house side and the Senate, in addition to Congressional. Next slide. Some of the tools that we would normally use to check these things have been impacted by some of the decisions of the United States Supreme Court, which has become dramatically more conservative in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And one of the cases is Shelby v. Holder, which I think was decided in 2013. And that's where the United States Supreme Court said it's not, we're not going to enforce Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act because we believe that the southern states and these few towns and cities in Florida also have shown that they're going to be fair. We don't need to double check and make sure that we have pre-clearance if there's any changes to the voting rights laws. Well, immediately after that, that United States Supreme Court decision, all across the state, all across the nation, more laws were written that were more limiting and some call them voter suppression, making it very, very difficult more difficult for people to vote. And unfortunately, many of the groups that have felt the burden the most are minority groups, Black and Brown communities, people with language issues, people with disabilities, younger people. And there's been arguments that many of those people vote more, maybe more democratic on the scale. Remember, the league's interest is not helping one or the other, it's just everyone being treated the same. Um, so, another case that's really powerful is the Rucho v. Common Cause case mentioned by Mr. Early. And that case, it's a little bit interesting where the court said, United States Supreme Court said, uh, we are not going to be looking at political issues in federal court with regards to gerrymandering. If you want to stop political gerrymandering, there's a way you can do it. And they literally cited the League of Women Voters case, the case we were just talking about, and they literally cited our fair districts. And they said, hey, Florida did this work. Florida citizens took it upon themselves to establish these standards, which are clear, enforceable, and if you want to stop political gerrymandering, then you in every state must do what Florida has done. So even though it was a case that was sad that the federal courts would not take up state political gerrymandering, in a sort of backhanded way was a wonderful compliment to the work that we have done in the state of Florida. And we were held out as a light and a guideline to all the other states. If you want to prevent political gerrymandering, do what Florida has done. Next slide. So we're going to fast forward a little bit again, now that you know a lot of the history. What are some of the things that were done differently this time around? Well, as far as we know, in the state of Florida, people have been researching. We've never had a governor submit their own map because it says in our Constitution that the drawing of the redistricting lines and all of this is done by our Senate and done by our House representatives, and it's treated, excuse me, like any other legislation. They have to then agree and have a joint bill, which then is passed and then goes to the governor for up or down of veto or signing. And so no other governor has decided to put maps out there. So that was a big jump, and many people believe that it was beyond his legal authority to do that. But when you actually looked at the content, that was another issue. Not only did the governor do something highly unusual, he also chose to put out a map that was directly harmful to the voting strength of African Americans and Hispanics. Instead of complying with our fair districts, which says you have to look to see if there are additional districts for you to draw, which one of our complaints with the Senate and House maps, not only did the governor not look for any additional maps, even though we have basically 2 million more people of color in or Hispanic language in the state, he went ahead and he made it a smaller number of districts available for African American and Hispanic access districts. And the District 5 in particular, where Congressman Lawson has his seat. That was very unexpected, and it seems to violate several laws all at once. Um, our fair districts, it seems to violate our fair districts, as we talked about the tier one, and it seems to violate or the other part of tier one of favoring one party over the other. It also seems to be a direct violation of the Voting Rights Act, which talks about um, you have to give access, again, those opportunities to minority districts, and you cannot have retrogression. In other words, you can't go smaller. Once it's been established that there's a minority access district, you can't go smaller. So many people are shaking their heads and surprised and dismayed at the governor's very aggressive attempt to limit the voice of the minorities in the state of Florida. Next slide. As you know, the governor did something else that was very aggressive and unique. He asked for an advisory opinion from the Florida Supreme Court saying, is my map essentially that where he's taking away access districts from minority and racial groups, is that lawful? Or is drawing this line all the way across for District 5 from Jacksonville all the way across to past Tallahassee, is that unlawful? Now, remember what we talked about earlier, okay? We talked about the tier 1 and the tier 2, right? It says in black and white, if what the governor is concerned about is it's not compact because it goes across several uh, counties and districts, and he's saying it's not compact, and that's the reason I can change it. But tier one dominates over tier two. Compactness defers to tier one. Again, those comments don't comport with what's actually written in the law. In our state guidelines, and remember, United States Supreme Court said in the Rucho case, the Florida Fair District's guidelines are clear, they are enforceable, and the rest of you states out there, if you want to prevent partisan gerrymandering, do what Florida did. So it is surprising and very concerning for the governor to come out with this and then turn around and ask the Florida Supreme Court basically to give him a green light. Well, this process was denied. The Florida Supreme Court said after several briefs were filed by Fair Districts Now, one of our coalition partners, and Common Cause, and several others filed a brief saying this is not ripe, this is not a law yet. It's so the governor can't ask about something that hasn't happened, and then it's not the governor's job to draw maps. So the right to go to the Florida Supreme Court and get advice on the governor's actions is only on things that he is supposed to be doing. And the Supreme Court basically declined and said, we're not going to do this for numerous reasons. Because it would implicate the state statutes, it would implicate our state constitution, it would implicate the Voting Rights Act, all of which require very detailed fact finding to determine whether things have been done constitutionally. The governor was basically asking for a massive amount of litigation for the Supreme Court, Florida Supreme Court, to even get to this answer. So they just said, we're not going to do it. Recently, the governor has indicated that he is thinking about not agreeing with whatever the Senate and the House, our state legislators, come up with regards to the congressional maps. And I don't know that he used the word veto. I didn't hear that. But there was a statement that was reported that he said he would not sign off on anything that he thought was unconstitutional. And that's part of his brief and his argument was that because it spread out so much, it was unconstitutional. Next slide. So the next step is the Senate maps with regards to the division for the drawing of the lines for the Senate districts and the House districts are going to be reviewed by our Florida Supreme Court for facial correctness. And as Mr. Early stated, once the governor asked for the advisory opinion and has been going public making additional statements, the House did not finish its congressional map drawing and has delayed one of their meetings, which was set for last Friday, has been moved. So it's clear that there's a lot of push-pull between the governor, perhaps from others advising the governor outside of the state. There's what was I think in the Washington Post, there were quotes from Mr. Bannon, who was taking credit for directing the governor to draw the maps in the first place. So there's a lot happening behind the scenes, and we'll have to see how things move going forward. If the Senate and the House are going to stick to their plans, and I think Speaker Sprouse indicated that that was the intent, but there's just a lot of pressure and a lot of influences going on right now in the state of Florida. Next slide. So what can you do? We also want you to know, as Mr. Early said, we're focusing right now a lot on our state and House maps and redistricting, but there are things that go on locally too. And Mr. Early did a great job of showing you what's going on in Leon County. This is going on across the state. There's school board lines that can be drawn on odd years. There's county and city district lines that can be drawn on odd years for the most part. So as we take this understanding about redistricting on state level, it also holds true for local. So let's all of us pay more attention to what's going on locally too. Next slide. Also, we're doing one of the suggestions right now. We're hosting community groups where we can talk. Many of the voting rights activists and those who protect the voting rights and redistricting are watching carefully to see if there needs to be any intervention in the courts. That's not been decided because we don't know everything that's going on. Pay attention to what's going on with your legislators and the things that they're saying and doing. Next slide. Of course, you can always join the League of Women Voters. We take men, and we did since 1972. My husband's a member, and many of our members are male. We don't care your party. We don't care your affiliation. We just don't work on parties and candidates when we're doing our league work. It's all about just opening the doors to enfranchisement to everybody. One of the things that some states have done is thinking about discussing whether we should have an independent commission draw our maps, as some states have. I think they have that in Ohio and several others. Next slide. Yep, right now, because we were talking about all the pressure and everything that's going on across the state of Florida, and some of the comments that were made by persons in other parties talking about how they had pressured the governor to do X and do Y. And we want to make sure that our representatives know that we have fair districts in Florida, as stated by the Rucho case, in the Supreme Court case. We want to adhere to our fair districts. We don't want gerrymandering. We don't want retrogression. We want to follow the Voting Rights Act. We want to follow our own guidelines. We want to insist not that the governor not throw his weight around and try to force violations of the law and potential litigation. So reach out to your representatives and let them know that we want all of our laws adhered to, and we don't want to violate the voting rights of our minority communities. Next slide. Here's some places where you can look to get more information. I just put in the Washington Post article that came out yesterday. Very comprehensive discussion. I think Mr. Early had mentioned it too. So with that, Barbara, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Cecile. Another excellent presentation. Um, Before we open up the chat for questions, Cecile, Mark, do either of you have questions, comments for each other?
I
Mark,
would say, oh, go ahead, Cecile.
I think you covered the waterfront. You did an excellent job. I was taking notes myself.
Well, you certainly educated me, I guess re-educated me. I don't focus a whole lot on redistricting because that really is something that happens to me. And then I have to deal with the outcome. So your discussion about tier 1 and tier 2, that refreshed in my mind a lot of what I actually had forgotten since the last redistricting. So, and I think you're correct in your assessment of the prioritization of tier 2 versus tier 1. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the courts. But I think obviously there is some strong legal basis for challenging some of what's been done, as well as the potential where the 2010 census for the state lines is maybe predominating over the 2020 census. So the new numbers haven't potentially. I haven't looked at that a lot, but I have no reason to doubt what you're saying, that that needs to be factored in more carefully. We do need to have an election this fall, though. But we'll deal with it. We need the lines to be right because we're all here to empower the voters, and that's what
Right.
it's.
And I think right now, because there is so much discussion, again, I don't know, Barb, if you can select that link and put it in the chat at some point, or that slide. I'm not good with these things, how to move things around. But I think Barbara sent it to me. Thank you. Yeah, Barbara sent me that link on the Washington Post. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I could show that right now, actually. I've got it. There's actually a good set of maps. Is that what you were showing?
It was a wonderful discussion of the history and then the impact today and some of the influences that may be impacting our governor. But all that to say, all of our senators and all of our representatives will be voting. So if we want to do a postcard, if you want to do a postcard campaign or call, email, let them know. We are watching. We know what's going on. We are hearing that there's a lot of influences on our state that have nothing to do with what's good for Florida. The influences are violating our laws, and we don't want Florida to be sacrificed for the political desires of national entities. That we as the Supreme Court said in Ruto, Florida has fair districts. Follow it. The rest of you make your laws like Florida. And so if the Supreme Court said we're doing good, please don't degrade from these standards that we fought so hard for.
The chat is open. Mark, are you going to put that link in the chat? The other thing is I can email.
Well, I'm going to share the maps real quick. So do you see the maps?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the current map is on the left. The governor's map, which was somewhat unprecedented, is in the center. The fact, somewhat, it's very unprecedented. He submitted a map. And then here's the House proposal. And as Cecile mentioned, Sprouse does indicate, at least the latest news, was that you can probably, I'm reading a quote from Politico just within the last few days, you can probably anticipate the House would keep Lawson's district largely as it is now configured. But there, as Cecile said, there's a lot of political pressure coming down for them to change that. And we'll see where that goes. So I'm going to stop sharing that.
That was really helpful, Mark. Thank you.
The chat is open, so people can write questions in the chat box.
And I will put that link.
Yeah, and I will read that. I can also email all our participants with that link as well. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the chat box, if you point your cursor to the bottom of your screen, you should see a bunch of icons, and you should see one for chat. If you don't see it there, change the view on your screen to the top right, on the top right to full screen. And we will take all questions through the chat.
So I did post 2 links. The first one's the Washington Post, which is a much more extensive article than just those 3 maps I showed. And then the Politico article is pretty good too. That's where there's some statements from some of the House members, specifically Sprouse, where he's, at least at that point in time, suggesting that they aren't going to stick with their version of the map that they submit. But the governor can veto those.
Excuse me, Supervisor Early. It looks like once we open the chat, the first question might be for you.
Okay, I missed that. Where did,
It's
okay,
at the
yeah.
very top. I'll let you read it.
From Brandon Peters.
Yes.
I recognize that name. Hey, Brandon. So under Florida's broad, okay, let me open this up so I can read it easier. Under Florida's broad public records laws, should supervisors of elections provide year-round access to vote-by-mail data? Okay, I'm gonna have to think this one through. For new state legislative districts to anyone who requests that data, regardless of the mandatory data access provisions found. I could say that possibly, yeah. I think you're getting to the fact where we don't have to start providing that until, what is it, 60 or 90 days out from the primary, basically, if I remember correctly. So should we? Frankly, I don't have a big problem with that. Actually, I've seen there is a public records request out there somewhere, I believe. And this data is very easy to get. Now, there's 2 things. One is, it depends on, I guess, what data. If you're talking about the voter information specific, like voter names and all of that, I might have to think deeper about it, but it's just as far as the numbers and standing requests and that kind of thing. That's a very simple thing to provide. So you might want to clarify what you're asking about here.
We're also asked if we can email the proposed redistricting maps. Are you 2 okay if I share your slides when I send an email out to everybody?
The league generally doesn't share slides that
Oh.
way, Barbara, so we won't be able to, but maybe what we can do is pick out a couple of slides to send.
Excellent. And if for some reason since I'm not exactly an expert with Zoom, if I fail to get people's emails, go ahead and email me or email voter services. I'll write that in the chat.
I see another question from Brandon.
That's a good question.
Everything is being looked at, Brandon. Everything. And with every lawsuit that the league gets involved with and many of our voting rights activists, we look at what's going on the trial level, state, in the federal system, trial level, and the federal system, trial level, and then on the appellate level, what's likely to happen and how could everything end up. These are all part of the analyses that people use and have impacted our litigation for decades when we look down the road.
Yeah, I think Brandon's basic point is be careful what you ask for. Because
absolutely.
Yeah.
Our hands may be forced though if the governor is planning on doing a veto or
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, I understand that.
If it would be very interesting and something for us to note and be of great significance under our fair districts if the maps which were leaning one way all of a sudden changed and went in a different direction when people have stated we don't want to do that. That would almost be Exhibit A, but we don't know what's going to happen. We're watching very attentively. Those of us who meditate and pray, we're doing that. We are getting all aspects of our focus are on what is going on.
And having been involved a lot in the legislature the last several sessions, the amount of pressure happening behind the scenes is immense. So certain people may want to do the right thing, but it's very politically difficult for them to do that. So it's a scary world over there, frankly.
Supervisor Early, I think in one of your slides, there was a link. Was it Florida redistricting dot something? I didn't get the end
Let
of it.
me go look
Would that
through
answer
here.
the question for the person who wanted the redistricting maps?
Likely, yeah.
I apologize. It
Here
was
it
up
is.
there early.
I'll put it in there. I did see that.
And you guys,
Question.
everything's just saying thank you for the excellent presentation, but I'm
I'm-
sure you probably saw that yourself.
I'm
High
searching.
five.
Thank you
my,
all for, thank you, the Tallahassee League,
There it
for
is. You got
stepping
it.
out there and organizing this and pulling it together, reaching out to your community partners and bringing Mr. Early in. This is job well done, and the league will be sharing your success and what you've done at our next local leaders call this week. And so that others, because it does tend to be regional, you reach out to those and you see, and you do community work with, you see them, so many events. And so it is very local, but we'll make sure that others know what you've done.
I don't see any, will this recording be available to other groups upon request? Do you, Mark or Cecile, have any objection for the recording to be made available?
Let me bring that back to the board. Again, the league is, because we don't want to have anything be misunderstood. Let me get back to you on that one, Barb.
Okay.
That's where I tend to lean too. I mean, I hate to say that. So frankly, I say everything I say with the expectation it's going to be a headline. So do what you will.
Excuse me. There is another question. Jackie Collins Robinson, if there is a governor veto and State House / Senate don't override, does the prior map or the old map prevail relative to 2022 election?
I think that is the general expectation, unless there is an immediate detour off into potential litigation. And then there could be requests for stays or any different kinds of relief depending on actions taken.
Thank you. And there, Mark did post the Florida redistricting.gov for those who want to go and look at the maps. Florida is spelled out. You can redistricting.gov.
Susie, did we miss any other questions?
No, I don't think so. I'm scanning. Great job, you guys.
Excellent.
you.
Thank you all. Really great. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all the preparation. And this was a joy.
Thanks for the opportunity. And I can certainly, I can certainly make my slideshow available, but do what you will with the recording also.
What I think we can do, Barb, is we've submitted guidelines to every representative and every senator that contain some of the information, the basic information that we have presented in our PowerPoint, and that is in the public domain. So I will have the office send you that, and you can send that to our attendees.
Okay.
We have put that out into the public.
Excellent.
For public use.
Okay. Thank you all.
Everybody gets 7 minutes back of their life. Yay.
Bye all.
Thanks for coming. Thank you, everybody, for coming.